Michner has wanted to write about the Chesapeake Bay for many years. He knew the water from sailing the bay while in college. Before he wrote the book Chesapeake, he got to know the people, and he saw the bay and the eastern shore from the air, a perspective one never forgets. The water doesn't just wash against the land, its tidal currents push far into the eastern shore, making it clear why life there has always been dominated by the water and why the shore is an enclave, separate, cut off by the bay which gives it life. James Michner totally immersed himself in the eastern shore. He bought a home near the Choptank River and began writing stories about that area, which would become his new novel. Michner told me of the love he has for the bay and the shore, but as evidenced in his best-selling books, Michner's thoughts can best be expressed in his own words.
Choptank River just makes my heart beat faster. It's a crazy, it's not really a river, I suppose. No water runs into it. It's just a backwater of the Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay is a backwater of the Atlantic Ocean, but it's a marvelous place.
What led you to the Choptank as a setting for the book?
I concluded about 10 or 15 years ago that there were a lot of people could write about Washington and the Revolutionary War at Yorktown and so on. There were not very many people who had a feeling for backwaters like the Choptank or the Wecomico or the rivers over here. And once I made that discovery, that what I could do best was on the eastern shore, I never went back. I knew that I had to grapple with this one.
Mr. Michner, your last major novels with Hawaii and The Source, Centennial, and now Chesapeake have all followed very successfully a similar pattern. Is this a formula that you've fallen into?
I don't like the word formula because that almost seems as if you're writing to a predestined pattern. But the fact is that I love to go back into history. I'm a geography buff. I'm very strong in geology. And when I look at a place, I intuitively like to know how it was put together and what its significant factors are. So that I would have to answer yes to your question. I have evolved in my writing a pattern for telling a long story in episodic form, which apparently a lot of readers like to stay with until the end to see how it all comes out.
You don't have much competition in that kind of novel either, do you?
No, it's a curious thing, Dave. I do not recommend what I do for anybody else. I think for somebody else it might be too onerous to begin with. It might involve too much research, that they haven't done in the background. And also, there are a lot better ways to tell stories than I tell them. So I think what can judiciously be said is that I have stumbled upon a device which is absolutely right for me.
When you're writing, do you write a lot more than you know that you will use and then pare that down, or do you write very efficiently?
I would say I knock out about 10% only. I work very hard to get it organized right. I work fairly closely to plan. I don't write out the plan, but I have it up here. And then, inevitably, some of it isn't very good, and you knock that out. But I rewrite practically 95% of it. But I don't throw away a great deal because I have worked moderately well to plan.
When you're writing, does the mood you happen to be in at the moment affect how you're writing a particular story?
The secret is always to end on Monday at a point where you just want to get out of bed Tuesday morning and get back to it. So I protect my mood very carefully. I go into training when I write. I watch my diet. I go to bed early at night. I get up very early in the morning. And some mornings I just can hardly wait to get to work. I'm so excited about it. I don't allow myself to get into the doldrums.
Some of the endings to some of the major characters in your books, the way they die, are so dramatic. Do you personally get upset when you're writing this down? And do you sit there with tears rolling down your cheeks when you're writing these terrible things?
That's a very personal question, Dave, but I would be less than human if sometimes I didn't feel a sense of tremendous loss.
Mr. Michner, in the beginning of Chesapeake, Pennaquod, the Indian,
leaves his village and he comes down the Susquehanna and into the bay that he'd never seen before, only heard, and settles on a little island, which is, of course, unnamed, but it's Devon Island, I find out later. And I get my map out, and it's not there at all on the Chesapeake. Is every place that you mentioned imaginary in Chesapeake?
I have 4 major sites in the Choptank River, and all of them are very studiously on land which doesn't really exist and which has never existed. I do this because I don't want to get mixed up with historical reality, because then I have to prove what I say. I also want to avoid invasion of privacy of somebody else's life or somebody else's land. And also because I can make them as interesting as I want to make them. I have an island that doesn't exist and a wonderful marsh that doesn't exist, although there are prototypes for it, and a cliff on the edge of the river, and a little town with a court and a courthouse and a slave square and a shipyard, and it's on land that doesn't exist. So you won't find the terrain on any map, but I provide a make-believe map which will spell it out very clearly.
We'll take a trip on the Chesapeake and actually see those imaginary locations right after this short break, so stay with us.
We're 13. People like you. People like Baltimore. People like you. People like Maryland. People like hard-shell crabs and science labs and joining the fleet. People like you. People like neighborhoods. People like you. People like families. People like scrubbing stoops and sailing stoves and planting the corn and the wheat. People like you. People like old and new. Like the bull roast too. Look at it our way. We're Channel 13. People like you. They like the Chesapeake. People like you. They like the winning streak. People like birds and coats and jars and making the future come true. People like you. We're 13.
If I wanted to try to locate where these imaginary places are, I mean in the bay or the land nearby, how would I go about doing that?
We could go in a small boat out of Cambridge or Oxford, 2 wonderful ports that have been used for the last 300 years, and go out into the Choptank River. And where the river debouches into the Chesapeake, that would be Devon Island. It's patterned after Sharp's Island, which at the turn of this century had 2 big resort hotels on it. And with the working of the tide and the winds, the island has completely disappeared. There's a lighthouse there, cocked at a lovely angle because the ice hit it so bad last year. But that's all that's left of this once marvelous place. Well, that captivates the imagination automatically. You don't have to be a great imaginative writer to have that grip you. The next would be the cliff where the Quakers live. Not high, maybe 10, 20 feet, because this is all alluvial. There are no mountains or hills, not even any hills in this area. It's not widely known in American history that the Quakers, of whose church I am a member, but I don't make a big thing about it, were savagely persecuted in New England. I think 6 of them were beaten to death for refusing to become Episcopalians or whatever the religion was at the moment. They were very resolute men and women. They were clubbed up and down the colony by people who felt that there was only one religion and you better conform. And I pick up one of these men, a carpenter, who is being thrown out of Massachusetts. In fact, he's thrown out 3 times, and he keeps coming back, and they finally make a deal with him to get him down to Maryland where he'll be better received. This happened. It happened several times. Maryland was a refuge in those days for the religious non-believer. He had to believe in Jesus, and he had to believe in the Trinity, or he could be hung, he could be hanged. My wife always gives me the devil about saying a person could be hung. It's hanged, I'm told. I didn't learn that. And then you'd come farther up at the north end of the present bridge, where there's just plowed land. You're to imagine a town of Patamoke, where a great deal of the action takes place.
Now, Patamoke, the imaginary town of Patamoke, would be just across the bridge then from...
Yes, it's as if Cambridge, which is on the south shore, were just flip-flopped, and we're on the northern shore. Patamoke's always... was savagely persecuted in New England. I think 6 of them were beaten to death for refusing to become Episcopalians or whatever the religion was at the moment. They were very resolute men and women. They were clubbed up and down the colony by people who felt that there was only one religion and you better conform. And I pick up one of these men, a carpenter, who is being thrown out of Massachusetts. In fact, he's thrown out 3 times, and he keeps coming back, and they finally make a deal with him to get him down to Maryland, where he'll be better received. This happened. It happened several times. Maryland was a refuge in those days for the religious non-believer. He had to believe in Jesus, and he had to believe in the Trinity, or he could be hung, he could be hanged. My wife always gives me the devil about saying a person could be hung. It's hanged, I'm told. I didn't learn that. And then you'd come farther up at the north end of the present bridge, where there's just plowed land. You're to imagine a town of Patamoke, where a great deal of the action takes place.
Now, Patamoke, the imaginary town of Patamoke, would be just across the bridge then from...
Yes, it's as if Cambridge, which is on the south shore, were just flip-flopped, and we're on the northern shore. Patamoke's always a little smaller than Cambridge, but it has many of the characteristics: a boatyard, a place to, a haven, a courthouse, and a very attractive town, apparently, in all periods.
So Patamoke, the old, would look like many of the old parts of Cambridge look today.
Yes, if you walked through the older parts of Cambridge, particularly the industrial area, you would get pretty much a feeling of what Patamoke must have been like in, say, 1880. when the watermen are beginning their lively performances on the bay. There would be many things that look alike. Many of the houses in Cambridge were built then. High Street, which is one of the good streets of America, famous, it ought to be famous all over, is just a gorgeous sequence of old houses dating back to the 1810s. So there are a lot of remnants around here of what things must have looked like in that period. And then if you come farther in, you reach a gorgeous marsh. I love marshes, as you know from what I've written about them. I've had many happy hours in marshes following birds and deer and seagulls and the rest. It's an imaginary place added to the North Shore.
These marshes, people could lose themselves back in these marshes.
Oh, yes. South of the Choptank, there are whole areas of vast marshes. There was a young man working at a research laboratory named Sonny Mowbray, whom I happened to meet, who bought a marsh south of the game preserve on Blackwater Creek, I think it is. And I spent an extended period of time with him in there. I was lost every minute. He would come to a dead end and he would say, well, it's over here, and then he'd come to it's over there. And it was as if you were there in the year 1600. You see no wires of any kind. You see no roads, no bridges. You see no automobiles, no airplanes. You are in an area so remote, Dave, you wouldn't believe it. Now, you do find some mosquitoes.
And that would be where the Turlock watermen were living.
Yes, they occupied that marsh.
The watermen themselves, you have them descending from, I believe you described him as a ferret-faced, well, he was a scoundrel from England.
He was a scoundrel.
Thrown out of England. Now, how are the watermen going to take to this guy?
I think that the continuing family in my book, which arouses most interest, is the little wormy guy from London docks named Turlock, who comes over here and settles and becomes the first of the great watermen. He's a pretty nefarious type, willing to take on anything. He has children by 3 or 4 different women and 3 or 4 different breeds and 3 or 4 different languages. And he and his group populate the area, and they're a noble group indeed. They survive. In the last chapter, I have a section about the descendant of old Turlock luring geese into his guns with a tape recorder. And it's so criminal that he should have been arrested on sight. Well, the watermen of this area are the ones who give it character. Take this wonderful craft I'm on today, the Stanley Norman. I worked aboard this when it was oystering. There's some shovels over there that I put a lot of time in on. You do that, you get a great respect for the watermen and how they make their living, and the fact that they provide a solid base to the economy here. These fellas in boats like this really go out and work the bay.
In a minute, we'll go out with a veteran crabber as he does just that, work the bay, as we continue with Michner's Hidden Chesapeake.
Discover Chesapeake, James Michner's exciting history of a place and its people. Now 20% off at all Baltimore Heck.
Buck Handle, Buck, tax office. It's inventory tax time again. Should be quite a bill.
Warehouse is having an inventory tax reduction sale. Tomorrow only, room-size rugs are only $50, and quality broadloom is priced from just $2.88 a square yard. And the more carpet we sell, the less inventory tax we pay.
But that's not fair.
So if you need carpet and you don't see bills tomorrow, you're making a big mistake.
If you're looking for great entertainment...
That's exactly what I'm looking for.
...and the hottest stars...
It's cooking, man.
It's the Mike Douglas Show.
Mike makes your day happy and different. You'll love it that way.
Frank Sinatra Jr. Monday with Mike. Baltimore's landmarks, the past preserved now for the future. Support historic preservation. Write Baltimore Heritage, Box 1317, Baltimore, Maryland 21203.
The Chesapeake Bay, brackish water, giving life to many kinds of sea life, and life to the watermen who fish the bay. Earl Abey is a veteran waterman. He's worked the bay and the backwaters for more than 50 years.
There's a big one. Everything's happened to me in a lifetime. I fell over in the river one time here and had to swim ashore. The boat went and left me in the night. I leaned over to work on my crab line, tightened it, and my feet slipped out and went in the river. The boat went right on and left me out here swimming.
Did your daddy get you started in this?
Yes, he excuse me, he worked in this line of work. There's a lot of changes. The method's about the same, but our boats are so much different than where when he crabbed. He started crabbing with a sail. You can imagine sailing down a line kept you pretty busy.
Yeah. Did you do that when you were a boy?
Oh no, not that far back. We always had engines. But I crabbed since I was 13.
What kind of changes have there been in the Chesapeake since you've been crabbing?
There's very little bit of changes in this operation. The only problem that we have is the scarcity sometimes. But other than that, I don't see any changes. Everybody gets into it, usually stays. Of course, what bluffs people, especially younger people, most is this early hours. You can find many young people want to get 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They get all ambitious and go buy themselves a boat and say, I'm going to work on the river, and they go about 3 days. For everything you know, you see your boat tied up. The bed feels so good, too.
Yeah. Do you have any problems with renegades?
No. Most of that, you can tell us about? Most of that is just stories, people. We get mad at one another and threaten to shoot one another, but nothing ever comes of it. As far as this, the crab war and the oyster wars, most of that was just talk. Oh, once in a while somebody gets a few drinks, he was maybe shoot across the policeman's bow way up in the air, but he's not trying to kill anybody.
Yeah.
And then the policeman sometimes may think he is and shoot directly at him, but very little of that I've ever known was serious.
The waterman, what's the feeling about your heritage here? I mean, you consider yourself as, you great-great-grandfather came over from London or somewhere. Do you know anything about that, or is that a topic of conversation?
God, no, nobody knows where they came from. To think it had any sense, they wouldn't settle into this job. But no, a lot of people say, oh, people on the Eastern Shore are clannish and so forth. Some of them even hesitate to move over here to go to work, but not that may have been the case way back. way up in the air, but he's not trying to kill anybody.
Yeah.
And then the policeman sometimes may think he is and shoot directly at him, but very little of that I've ever known was serious.
The waterman, what's the feeling about your heritage here? I mean, you consider yourself as, your great-great-grandfather came over from London or somewhere. Do you know anything about that, or is that a topic of conversation?
God, no, nobody knows where they came from. To think it had any sense, they wouldn't settle into this job. But a lot of people say, oh, people on the Eastern Shore are clannish and so forth. Some of them even hesitate to move over here to go to work, but not that may have been the case way back there. A lot of people travel, so now you may have a person on Hooper's Island tomorrow and be in California the next day. So there was a time when they didn't get off the island. They were born on that island and stayed there.
Now, your son is in this business. Will he stay in it, and what about his children?
Well, he has the one son himself. It's hard to tell. I feel like he'll stay, and I feel like my son will stay in it because he loves this kind of work. And he quit a good job to go on here. He started something else, and he worked for the electric light company for 8 years, and he decided he didn't like that shift work. So he got himself a boat and went into this operation.
How about your wife? What does she think about the hours you have to keep in the...
Well, she's been with me 40 years, and she had quite a struggle, but she was a city girl to start with.
Really?
Kind of strange to her. She was born and raised in Baltimore City. Kind of strange to her, but she knows the operation pretty well now. No, it's always been a good life. We've always had everything we wanted, and I've worked to suit myself, and it's not always easy. It's not always this easy during stormy weather.
When you're out here alone and you have time to think, do you ever wish that you had done something else?
No, I've had every opportunity in the world to do other things, but I always get back to this.
What do you enjoy the most about it?
Well, I think you enjoy doing it suit yourself. Go and come when you want to, and a lot of times it's miserable. The weather gets bad, and you wonder why you're out here, but still, when you decide to go home, you have no one to tell you have to stay here. You can take up and go ashore. And a lot of freedom to this kind of operation. That's one of the reasons people go in it.
I spent a lot of time on the bay, and I worked as a crabber or as an oysterman in order to find out what it was like. I remember that one night I came home after a horrible day in March, frozen to death, and I threw my hat in the door and I told my wife, I don't care how much you're paying for oysters, it ain't enough. This is hard work. While I have been working here, myself, 16 practiced watermen have been drowned on the Chesapeake. Skipjacks like this have just upset. One last year, 6 men gone.
You mean in 2 years there have been 16
yes.
people? 16 watermen killed?
16 people killed. I think the bulk of them watermen. Mm-hmm. You know, a boat goes down, a storm comes up of a sudden. 3 weeks ago, I think 3 people were done in by a gust of wind. 3 different boats, 3 different parts of the Choptank. This is a tough body of water when those vast storms hit. They come up, you can't believe it. I was sailing not far from here, just around the corner really, about dusk, and the man in charge of the boat, I'm not a good sailor myself, I've sailed a great deal, but I've never captained a boat, looked up and he said, hey, we're in for trouble. Well, it was a beautiful day, just about like this. But out there in the west came these tumultuous clouds, and we just barely made it to a cove. We were tossed around like a peanut shell. And you get behind the headland, we were moderately safe. But I've seen some very rough water here.
People here on Maryland's Eastern Shore have a liking for their privacy. When your book comes out, do you expect that they will be sorry to see this kind of publicity brought to their shore?
That's a very serious problem. A person like me writing a book about Colorado or Israel or other areas performs both a service and a disservice. He performs a very great service in bringing to the attention of people who live there the roots of their historic past. He does a disservice in bringing also to the attention of people who want to move in for a fast buck. And I don't know how to balance that out, Dave. I really don't. I would think that this book would do some harm in that it would raise real estate values in certain areas that really shouldn't be raised. On the whole, however, I do feel confident that 25 or 50 or 100 years from now, it will still be being read as an account of one of the glorious parts of the American scene.
You've said before that you have great difficulty in talking about a work while it's in progress, but do you have any problem now that Chesapeake is finished in talking about it?
You know, I am governed by an artistic principle that was laid down by a French philosopher many years ago, and if any listener can tell me what his name is, I would deeply appreciate it because I didn't note it at the time, but it has become my guiding principle. He said that a work of art is never completed, it's released. If you worked on it 5 years more, it would be a little bit better. In 10 years more, you would eliminate a few solecisms. 20 years more, it would be a fragmentary bit better. But you don't have all that time. You work your head off and you reach a point at which you say, this is as good a job as I can do at this time, and I'm going to release it. It's never done, but...
As of July 4th, Chesapeake is released.
It is released, yes. And we turn to something else.
Comes from different places, turns a beautiful morning to a wonderful day. Things to see, things to do, places to be, there's lots for you.